Josh Hasten here, Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. It is Monday, July the 8th, 2019, the 5th of Tammuz, 5779, coming to you this morning from beautiful Jerusalem, the capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. Hope you're doing well in your part of the world. Get in touch with me during the week, Josh at thelandofisrael.com on Facebook. It's Joshua Hasten, or check out my page, Josh Hasten, Israel Advocacy and Journalism, on Twitter at Josh Hasten, and now on Instagram as well. Just a few minutes, we're going to be speaking to the one and only Israel Medad Winkie. Get his take on all of the latest developments in Judea and Samaria. He has a lot to share with our audience. But first, a little bit of news here. Israel National News, Arutz Sheva reports that Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday at the cabinet meeting, the weekly cabinet meeting, addressed Iran's declared plans to enrich uranium beyond limits set in the 2015 deal. I mean, at this point, who in their right mind still thinks that this was a good deal? The sad thing is there are people who still think this was a good deal, especially in the European Union. Prime Minister said Iran violated its solemn promise under the UN Security Council not to enrich uranium beyond a certain level. The enrichment of uranium is for one reason, and one reason only, the creation of atomic bombs. The Prime Minister went on to say the leaders of the P5+1 promised and committed themselves to snap back sanctions the minute Iran did that. It just did. Where are you? Prime Minister calling out the Europeans, the P5+1. Of course, the United States backed out of that bad deal. But the Europeans said that if Iran would attempt to violate the agreement, they would also snap back the sanctions. And right now, the Europeans have not, at this point, done that. I mean, this was a foregone conclusion. We knew Iran was going to violate the agreement. We knew the Europeans are so weak that they weren't going to take any steps. But now the Prime Minister is ratcheting up the pressure on Europe to do something, asking, where are you? That's a good question. Where are they? They're probably too busy labeling products from Judea and Samaria to actually have to take a stand when it comes to the Iranians. That's really what their worry is all about. Certainly not the well-being of the world, but it's always just about Jews in Judea building pergolas. That's probably what they're concerned about. Moving on here, on Saturday night, there was an attempted car ramming near the Chizmeh checkpoint just outside of Jerusalem. An Arab driver suspected of intentionally trying to ram and murder Israeli soldiers. He has been caught, according to the Times of Israel, after a brief manhunt. The IDF reported on yesterday. He steered his vehicle into troops near Chizmah, says the report, just north of Jerusalem, injuring 5 people, 3 of the soldiers suffering moderate wounds, 2 lightly wounded, according to the army. The IDF, in a statement, said it's treating this incident as a terror attack. The driver has not been officially or formally identified for the public. He rammed his car into the soldiers after seeing them on the side of the road. One of those moderately injured was a career soldier in his 30s. Another was a female soldier in her 20s, according to the report. And I'm sure we'll find out very, very soon who the person was, his name, where he came from, and the fact that he deliberately tried to murder Jews, Israeli soldiers, this past Saturday night. There's a front page analysis by our friend Anna Aronheim from the Jerusalem Post this morning, talking about the situation along the Gaza border, the situation between Israel and Hamas 5 years now after Operation Protective Edge. So I encourage you to go and read her full analysis. I'll just give a little bit of a summary here. Anna says it's been 5 years since the last IDF soldier crossed out of Gaza after Operation Protective Edge. While there hasn't been any full-blown military confrontation between Israel and Hamas, situation on the southern front is anything but peaceful. And to make a long story short, she essentially says that Israel has lost. 5 years later, Israel has lost its deterrent along the southwestern border with Gaza. She goes into detail about all the, I think it's 10 eruptions. I'm talking about rocket fire from Gaza. Since then, if you remember just, what was it, a month and a half ago, there were 690 rockets launched by Hamas and the other terror groups in Gaza at Israel. As of yesterday, I would have told you that 4 Israeli civilians were killed. Unfortunately, that number has gone up to 5. An 89-year-old woman from Ashkelon who sustained wounds running for the shelter, I believe, died yesterday, just yesterday, as a result of those rockets fired just, what was it, a month and a half ago. So 5 Israeli civilians murdered just a month and a half ago. And, of course, we have the weekly Friday violent demonstrations, attempted infiltrations is a more accurate definition of what's going on down there by the Hamas terror group and their supporters. Their goal, of course, is to enter the nearest Israeli community and kill all the Jews there. That's been going on now for over a year. The rockets, the tunnels, and everything else going on thanks to the Hamas terror group maintaining control over Gaza. And as she concludes here, so 5 years later, the quiet in Israel's south has run its course. The last year has seen, yes, 10 rounds of violent conflict, killing civilians and soldiers. Deterrence has been lost. It's only a matter of time until the next war breaks out. Deterrence has been lost. This, according to Anna Aronheim in the Jerusalem Post. You can read her analysis at jpost.com. Speaking of 5 years since the end of that military operation, Israel also marking 5 years since the kidnapping and murder of our 3 boys in Gush Etzion, who were simply trying to get home one evening and were kidnapped by Hamas and murdered shortly thereafter. There was a ceremony in Gush Etzion this past Friday in memory of the 3 Israeli teenagers, Gilad Shaar, Eyal Yifrach, and Naftali Frankel. It was held at the Oz V'Gaon Nature Reserve, established in their name in Gush Etzion, of course, by Yudit Katzover and Nadia Matar from the Women in Green movement, who established that beautiful nature reserve. The ceremony was held, planting of 18 trees at the entrance to the reserve, speeches, including one by Gush Etzion Regional Council head Shlomo Ne'eman, here now reflecting 5 years later. The tree, of course, according to a press release explaining, is a symbol of life, answering the mourning and bereavement that terror wanted to instill in the kidnapping and murder of the 3 teenagers. A press release sent out by Yudit Katzover, Nadia Matar, the Women in Green organization. So that is the latest news here from Israel, from Jerusalem. And in just a few minutes, we are going to be on the phone with Yisrael Medad, veteran leader of the communities in Judea and Samaria, columnist for the Jerusalem Post. He also works at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem to talk about Jewish life in Judea and Samaria and addressing some of the most pertinent issues on the table now affecting those who live in Yehuda v'Shomron, Judea and Samaria. My name is Josh Hasten. This is Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. Shout out to Binyamin Bresky, engineer extraordinaire, for all the work he does here, and Tabitha Epstein, who does everything behind the scenes. We are going to take a short break. Come back with Yisrael, Winkie Medad. Don't go anywhere.
This week on Rejuvenation with Eve Harrow, an interview with Dr. Lisa Friedman, author of the Hebrew book on the medieval manuscripts of Rashi. How did the Crusades affect Rashi's insights, and what was his role as a leader of the Jewish people?
He emphasizes the special connection of prophecy between the Jewish people and God. So if you look at each of the beginning opening Rashis of the 5 books, he's strengthening the Jewish people, which is a beautiful idea. Starting each book with a booster shot of inspiration.
For the full interview, check out Rejuvenation with Eve Harrow on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.
And we are back. Josh Hasten here, Israel Uncensored, on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. It is Monday, July the 8th, 2019, the 5th of Tammuz, 5779. And we're going to go to the phone right now to speak to Yisrael Winkie Medad. He is a research fellow at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center, also a columnist at the Jerusalem Post, and many other things. He is truly a leader of the Jewish community in Judea and Samaria. Winkie Medad, welcome to the show.
Josh, flattery will get you everywhere.
I try my best. So I just wanted to today touch on a couple of issues. I've been taking a bunch of groups around of late in Judea and Samaria, specifically in Gush Etzion, and there are always some basic questions which are asked, things that I guess we perhaps take for granted living in Judea and Samaria, assuming perhaps people understand the situation and understand these basic concepts about our day-to-day lives. So I want to just clarify a few things, if we can, for the audience. So the first question I want to ask you is, if you can, explain to the listeners, how is life different for Israelis living in Judea and Samaria under the civil administration, essentially the IDF or the Defense Ministry administration? How does that differ from those who are living in other places in pre-1967 Israel, Herzliya, Tel Aviv, Ra'anana, and the other cities essentially down in the coastal plain?
First of all, is that technically we're under a military government. The legal status of Judea and Samaria is that of what we call belligerent occupation. It's not that the occupation is belligerent, God forbid. It's that as a result of a belligerency or war or some sort of hostility. Israel came into Judea and Samaria and Gaza and other places in 1967, not as a result of an invasion, but as a result of a self-defense action when Arabs began to go to war, close down the Straits of Tiran, Jordanians firing shells into Jerusalem, into Ramat Gan and other places. So that's the status. In that case, technically, we're living in the territory defined by the League of Nations as to become the reconstituted Jewish national home, but Israel's full sovereignty does not exist here.
So what do you explain that? What does that mean, practically?
Practically means, it means that we have to deal many times, not as a regular citizen of Israel with all sorts of government agencies, but major aspects of our life are through something called offices of the military government. For example, let's take a simple one, public transportation. Okay? I can't go directly to a ministry of government, for example, the transportation ministry, without going through something called, in Hebrew, it's called Kamat Tachbura, the officer of the transportation division of the civil administration. There's always something in between me and the Israel government. Now, I might happen to know personally an Israeli minister and talk to him, but in terms of the legal aspects of it, when he has to do something, he has to go through a circumvented type of process in order for me to get a bus, in order for me to get a bus station, or all sorts of other things like that. We are Israeli citizens living in a military government-ruled area, which is not fully sovereign in the state of Israel. We believe that it's part of Israel. We believe that it will be part of Israel. But if you come to a court of law, for example, the High Court of Justice, they will deal with you as outside the state of Israel, that the state has undertaken several responsibilities to assure our safety, to provide us with water, but all these things go through a whole separate bureaucratic agency that sometimes is very good, sometimes is very bad, like with the land issues that recently has come up. Can Arabs build in A, B, and C, and under what conditions, and how close can they build to Jewish communities that are existing?
So it's transportation, there are issues with building, and I've told my listeners many times, there are issues with, if a Jew wants to build a pergola, he has to go through a whole system, unlike those who live in other parts of the country. But you mentioned issues of illegal building. Yesterday, an organization called the Regavim, my audience knows them because I used to represent Regavim, they carried out a stunt. I'll call it a stunt, and they're calling it a stunt. Essentially, they put up PLO flags in different strategic locations throughout Judea and Samaria to highlight the fact that there's so much illegal building going on by the Arabs in Area C, which is where all the Jewish communities are. So I just want your take, first of all, on that stunt that Regavim carried out, putting up the flags, and also just the issue in general of how significant the problem is of illegal building by the Arabs in our areas.
Well, as regards the stunt, it's a fair game. I'm a little older than you, so I can remember Rabbi Benny Alon climbing up the telephone pole outside of Bethel to hang a Palestinian or a PLO flag. And back in 94 or so, at the beginning of the Oslo process, I remember a fellow by the name of Aaron Dum, or Dumpa as we used to call him, with a whole staged process of Arab terrorists and refugees dressed up in kafiyot coming out of the plane at Atarot Airport and driving down the Shuafat Road. So these things are guerrilla theater. I don't think the left or the right has any monopoly, and no one has the other right to call it bad or good. It drew attention non-violently to a certain problem. As you said, can Arabs build in areas which would then perhaps endanger the life and the livelihood of Jews living nearby? Now, you might say, well, if it's their land, they can build it. And I would agree, if it was a peaceful situation. For example, in my area where I live, in the Shiloh block, we have a community called Esh Kodesh, which has been, over the years, suffering as Arabs have burnt fields, moved into their fields. There have been battles sometimes, and even a terror attack. So, in other words, we're not going to talk about innocent people just saying, I want my property rights, but people who have a proven bad criminal record who are coming closer and closer and trying to cut off water, perhaps, or other roads that are in the area that exist on state or wasteland, which doesn't belong to private Palestinian Arabs. So this is a situation that the government has to deal with. It's a spin-off, on the other hand, of what's happening opposite Kfar Adumim, where the Arabs set up a Bedouin encampment. They're calling it now in a village, and they refuse to leave. And the EU is pouring millions of EU dollars or Euro dollars into the community there.
So you mentioned some of the conflict between Jews and Arabs in our areas. I've talked about in recent weeks of the various arson attacks carried out by some of our neighbors trying to burn down our, in our case, cherry orchards in the Gush, throwing firebombs and whatnot. But overall, what would you say to those who may not understand the realities here? What is the current relationship between Jews, Arabs, overall throughout Yudav Shomron, Judea and Samaria?
Well, let me make an historic point, because, as you said, you bring people, sometimes I address groups, and they have no idea what's going on. Between 1920 and 1948, thousands of Jews who lived in Judea and Samaria, not in the time of the Bible, not in the time of the Talmud, not in the time of the Byzantines. You know, a lot of our unfavorable responses are, don't talk to me about ancient history. But in the 20th century, thousands of Jews who lived throughout Judea and Samaria, in Gaza, in Hebron, in Jericho, in Jenin, sometimes not very large numbers, but sometimes very large numbers, like in the Jerusalem area, were ethnically cleansed from the area by Arab terror. Mm-hmm. So The reason why there were no Jews here in 1967 wasn't because this wasn't our land or we weren't interested, but the Arabs kept us out. We've come back and we want to live here where we lived previously, and therefore the reality that you're asking about in terms of, do we have a right to be here? Do we have a right to go for water? Do we have a right to build roads, bring in electricity, agriculture, vineyards, olive trees? This is the Jewish homeland, and it's quite natural for the Jewish people to be in their homeland and to produce and to plow and to grow and to teach and to construct and to create all sorts of infrastructures and scientific achievements, including a university, than any other people has all over the world. And I think that's one of the hard parts that people don't realize, that we've had a very long and recent history with Judea and Samaria. Only for 19 years between 48 and 67 were Jews not in this area out of about a 3,500-year-old history.
So I guess this is my final question, and ultimate question is, now, with the current reality on the ground, there are various plans out there. You know, we're waiting for this Trump administration deal of the century. There are plans out there that are alternatives, perhaps, to what has been, I guess, mainstream, if you want to call it that, the so-called two-state solution over the last 25 plus years. If you were calling the shots, Yisrael, Winkie, Medad, and you had the option of choosing one of the other alternative plans to a two-state solution, what would you pick and why?
I don't think I necessarily have to pick a specific plan. I'd like to pick a specific process.
Okay.
The process is full normalization. The process then moves to de-terrorizing the educational and societal atmosphere in the Palestinian Authority. The next stage would be full cooperation as much as possible on all sorts of issues from the ground up. And then after a period of maybe 10 to 15 years, we can begin to talk about, do we change anything of the structure of government? For example, do we do then a complete census of how many Arabs actually do live in Judea and Samaria, and find out if there really is a demographic problem? And then we take away what was called in Ireland, I think, deregulation, take away all their guns and resupply them with the real amount of guns they agreed with Oslo, and not the thousands of other extra Kalashnikovs and other guns running around there. And then, of course, de-escalate their incitement, and I can go on and on. In other words,
right,
we don't have to necessarily pick an autonomy plan, a three-state plan, a two-state plan, or a one-state plan. We have to, I think, from my point of view, focus on the process. Are we going to live in coexistence? Are they accepting Jewish national identity? Do we accept who they are or they want to be? Do the Arabs of Israel remain in Israel, or do they have to move into the new Palestinian state if that ever happens? These are the issues that will assure that any political structure or resolution will be able to hold and not collapse like every single other plan or operation or arrangement happened in the past.
We are just scratching the surface here today. There's so many other issues that we could get to, that I would like to get to you with you as the days and weeks go on here on the show. I'd love to have you back on to talk about some of the other specifics which affect our lives in Judea and Samaria every day, and of course talk about our future. Of course, now more than ever, as we await the part two, I guess, the political aspect of the so-called deal of the century. We'll have to see how that develops. Israel, Winkie, Medad Research Fellow at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center, columnist at the Jerusalem Post, blogger extraordinaire, longtime leader in Judea and Samaria. I want to thank you for everything you do for the Jewish people. Thank you for coming on today, and definitely want to have you on in the near future to talk more about the realities about what's going on in Judea and Samaria. I think it's a lot of issues and topics that perhaps people are confused about and don't really understand. So I want to thank you so much for clarifying and for explaining, and hope to talk to you again soon. Have a great day.
Josh, thank you. It's been a privilege to be with you. Have a great day.
Thanks so much. And that's going to do it for this week's show. My name is Josh Hasten. This is Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com for Monday, July the 8th, 2019, the 5th of Tammuz, 5779. Don't forget, you can get in touch with me during the week, Josh at thelandofisrael.com. On Facebook, it's Joshua Hasten, or check out my page, Josh Hasten, Israel Advocacy and Journalism, on Twitter at Josh Hasten, and now on Instagram as well. Another big shout out to Binyamin Bresky, engineer extraordinaire, who is sitting right here beside me in Jerusalem, and to Tabitha Epstein for everything she does behind the scenes. Check out any part of the show if you missed it, and also don't forget to check out all the other wonderful programs and podcasts that the Land of Israel Network provides each and every day, except for Shabbat, of course. Wherever you are in the wonderful world of ours, be safe. Shalom from a beautiful summer day in Jerusalem. All the best. Talk to you, please God, next week. Shalom.
Prime Minister Netanyahu,
Benny Gantz,
Avigdor Lieberman,
Yair Lapid,
Bezalel Smotrich,
Moshe Feiglin.
What's going on behind the scenes as Israelis prepare to go to the polls on September 17th? Tune in to Inside Israel Today on the Land of Israel Network on thelandofisrael.com for all the action.